Did you find me on LinkedIn and read some
Yes.
articles? Oh, right.
So what happened was I was doing some research online, like who I can talk to, and I guess with LinkedIn's algorithm, I've been looking at maths articles.
Right.
So then your kind of content kind of popped up, and I was like, oh, this is interesting.
Was it different to what you're normally reading?
Yes, a little bit.
Can you tell me why? I'm interested because,
Oh, okay. I think it's just I'm not sure. Maybe it's the style as well. The writing is more lighthearted, so it's quite easy to understand what you're trying
yeah.
to convey. You kind of made a lot of analogies, real life analogies, which was quite
Right.
funny. So you kind of really put that into context, and also I think it's new kind of concepts and new ideas that I've not necessarily come across
Yeah.
before. So that's kind of I thought it'd be nice for us to have a chat.
So, well, I grew up on a fruit orchard, so I had a very practical upbringing
Oh, sorry, where's this again?
in Australia, South Australia. Very practical upbringing, and I guess I was a problem solver, a bit like my father. And then got into teaching. And I remember my first year of teaching, I was like, what I'm doing in the classroom is appalling. Like this is horrible. I was supposedly doing well, and I was teaching just the way that I'd been taught, but
Yeah.
I knew it didn't work.
Mm,
And I remember walking out of a classroom in my first year, and it was like an epiphany. It was like someone has to know how to do this properly
yeah.
because this certainly isn't the way to teach maths. Like I figured there was something out there, but I didn't know anybody who was in that world. And I thought, I'd like to find out how to do this well. And I have had an unusual ride through education because then I took some time off. So I had nomadic periods where I was doing a lot of casual teaching, but a lot of tutoring, maths tutoring. And I was finding the
Oh,
same things over and over again with these students who just had no idea what they were doing. They were
yeah.
just doing these ridiculous things on paper, but they didn't understand any of it. And
Yeah.
and so, and then as a casual teacher, I'd walk into a lot of different maths classrooms and the same thing. And I'm thinking, am I the only one who's just realizing there's a problem here? Uh, and I've always been a questioner. So, what I was trying to explore, I mean, I had time to think because I wasn't a permanent teacher, right? And I was doing hospitality as well. And so I had time to think and explore. And then I had two small school experiences where I was essentially the whole maths department. So I had no one telling me what to do. So I
Mm,
could experiment in the classroom, which is a very unusual. It doesn't happen to many teachers. Normally, you've got to fit in with your line, and everyone's got to teach a certain way and all that sort of stuff. Whereas I was able to explore, and then after the second experience, I ended up being the head of maths, and then the faculty grew and all that. And then it was time to move on. I just knew it was time to move on. And so I
yeah.
went into professional development. It wasn't that, I mean, I had discovered things for myself, but they weren't new things. I later on discovered, oh, this isn't new. This is other people have discovered this as well. So I was literally following my intuition and
Mm,
coming across ideas and talking to others and thought, oh, I should put that together. So I figured I had a few ideas that I wanted to try out with other maths teachers. And and I started with Teacher Training Australia. They allowed teachers to put up courses, and if they ran, they ran. If they didn't, they didn't. So that's where I started. And then that was like 2007. And then
oh,
2009, we started to do online courses. That was the opportunity. I remember Miles sitting me down saying, this is the direction. I knew nothing about online learning. And I thought, yep, I'm in, let's do it. So I just saw the green light. And I really took to it, I think, really well and developed my own sort of form of self-paced online courses that really make people think and actually get traction. And then so that was 2009, and then by 15, I knew my work could work overseas as well, but the umbrella I was under was, there were rules, and I felt a bit restricted, so I went out on my own. So that's kind of my story on
yeah.
what I'm doing.
Wow. So how long have you been doing this? Like for as a teacher, how many years were you teaching, and how many years have you been doing professional development?
Oh well, I was in and out of the classroom for about 20 years,
Oh, wow. Okay. And
maybe a bit
teaching?
less, six years as a head of department, and
Yeah.
then so I've been doing the professional development thing for
Since
13 years or so.
2000.
Yeah.
2009, right? You mentioned.
2007 is when we started.
Yeah.
2009 was the online.
Oh, right, right.
So I've worked with other consultants to develop their courses. So I've also collaborated on that level as well, which is a lot of fun. But in
Oh,
terms of what I'm writing about on LinkedIn, I'm using LinkedIn to connect with a lot of different mathematics leaders across the globe, and I'm also collaborating with Anya Mori, who's the mathematics director at Wellington International College in Shanghai.
oh, wow.
So I'm finding out about progressive education in China, which is pretty mind-blowing, actually. Are you Chinese originally?
Um, I'm
Heritage?
Chinese, but originally I'm from Singapore.
Oh, okay. Right.
Yeah, so our maths education is really different from here too, as
Yeah.
yeah, I find out. But thank you for sharing. So I guess we can just jump straight into the questions then.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you included the teaching maths bit, because if you said, well, what makes you so passionate about mathematics, I'm not a mathematics nerd. I used to read about maths teachers who would go home and spend all weekend working on a problem, and I'm thinking, no, I'm in the garden. I'm getting my hands dirty. I'm doing other things. So I'm not one of those sorts of people. I love maths and I think it's important, but from day one, I found the art of teaching mathematics really fascinating. And because mathematics can be taught so badly and so well, and the thing that as a PD provider that I find really fascinating is I hope people don't think I'm criticizing maths teachers, because I know everyone's doing the best they can with what they know, and they're trying to get through the syllabus and working really hard. There's nothing more difficult than trying to teach a class of students who aren't into maths. I mean,
Yeah.
seriously. And there's
Yeah.
a lot of classes of students who aren't into mathematics, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not criticizing teachers, but I've got an article where I talk about shooting ourselves in the foot. As a teacher, am I shooting myself in the foot? Well, when I look back, yes, I was shooting myself in the foot all the time. In other words, I don't know it, but the way I'm presenting it doesn't help the students get the understanding. It makes my job harder, makes their job harder, but I don't know that. So the whole PD thing is about shifting people's awareness and reflecting and seeing what's working, what's not working. So that's what I call the art of teaching maths, and that's what fascinates me. And it fascinated me as a teacher because I was always looking for that spark, when you've got the students on side.
Yeah.
And I knew it existed, but it took me a while before I could experience that. And there's nothing better than you've co-created this learning environment. Everyone's all in on the same page, and it's a fun experience, but it's really educational. And that can only happen when the students have got agency. We'll get to that later.
Yeah.
So that's the craft of teaching, which I've always been fascinated with. And it's particularly tricky and interesting in mathematics because there's just seems to be so much more going on than say in the humanities, which is still a fascinating area. I'm just not a humanities teacher, but so that's sort of why I'm interested in the art of teaching maths.
So you mentioned you're not necessarily interested in mathematics per se, like you're not,
Well, I'm not a geek.
Yeah, like I had a question. It's more like, if I'm not great at maths, can I still be a maths teacher? Is that like, yeah.
I think, and look, I come from very much from a what makes sense to me, right? Which is not necessarily a popular viewpoint of a place to come from, but that's me.
Yeah.
One of the problems that mathematics teachers face, and we don't know that we face it, is that almost all of us never struggled with mathematics at school. So I'm a teacher. I remember 3 lessons in year 11 where I didn't get it, and I didn't like maths for 3 lessons. What would it be like if I didn't like maths, 4 out of 5 lessons a week for 12 years? I mean, what a horrific subject to have to take. I've got no idea what that's like because I got maths, so I understood it, right? So unless I've started self-reflecting and thinking about this and had experience with students where I've gone, oh my God, this 13-year-old doesn't understand basic place value and I'm trying to get them to do fraction work. Like, this is insane. Unless I've had some kind of inkling, it makes maths teachers ill-equipped to empathize with what it's like to not understand. So therefore, there's not the same drive for mathematics teachers to focus on understanding. Because we were all taught with not a great focus on understanding. We kind of picked it up, and some kids do, but most students don't. So I'm not sure what your original question was, but
about maths teachers.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah.
So
I think the reason why I asked that is also because I think maybe some maths teachers feel like they're not great at maths, so they're not confident in teaching the subject. I think that's just one scenario. Yeah, one case.
There is a big problem in primary schools, and I'm not criticizing the primary school teachers, but could you think of anything worse to teach than mathematics if you were never good at it at high school? It's a shocker. And so they kind of avoid, trying to avoid it, and they do their best. I think it's advantageous. This is the point I was trying to make in that last story. I think it's advantageous if some students who do struggle a little bit with maths but still get there in the end go into teaching, because they are better equipped, I think, at teaching than the nerd, no offense to the nerds, than the nerd who is just a genius, and right? That's my personal opinion. So I think it can be advantageous, but you still have to be able to, you still need to understand how it works.
Of course. Yeah, definitely. That's great. I love that you shared about the kind of like the spark that you mentioned in students. Maybe we'll talk a bit more about that, just to share a scenario when that really happened in your classroom.
Sure.
So talking about maths teachers, so let's say, for example, I'm a maths teacher, right? And I'm struggling with my class. I notice my students are disengaged, they're not understanding what is taught. So if you were in my shoes, as a teacher, what's the first three things that you would kind of look at and reflect? And then what are the changes that you would implement?
Right. It's a great question. Great question. So I would, first of all, ask, why are they disengaged? Well, first of all, I have to notice that they're disengaged. And I have seen teachers, not necessarily mathematics teachers, but who just kind of plow on in their lesson, even though the students are not engaged. So you need to, first of all, recognize there's a problem, and then ask, well, why are they disengaged? And my experience in reflecting would say that almost all students disengage when they don't understand. And I'm not talking about understanding the procedure that I've just taught them. I'm talking about understanding the concepts that those procedures are based on. One of my favorite recent statements is, there's too many students spending too much time in too many maths lessons not understanding the work that they have been given to do. They can maybe do it, but they don't understand what they're doing. It's just this ridiculous code that they have to follow whatever the teacher says, and out pops an answer, and some of it kind of half makes sense and a lot of it doesn't make any sense at all. If they don't understand, then that's a big diagnosis. The way I like to explain that, if I go back to my early years, because I think this is part of the problem. I was a teacher, maths teacher, and so I thought my role was to teach procedures. So I'd go into a classroom, I'd have my lesson plan, I've got the next 3 or 4 procedures, I'd write a procedure on the board, explain it, copy this down, do another 5 or 10, stop everyone, here's the next thing, blah, blah. That's what I do. And I still think that's how most mathematics is taught as a default. I know that there's a lot more to it than that, but as a general rule, so students are replicating what the teacher's doing a fair bit of the time. So I call this procedures first, understanding second. So I'm teaching procedures. That's my number one priority, and I hope that the understanding occurs, whatever that means. But I knew, even in my first year, I knew a lot of students weren't picking it up, it being understanding, and I didn't even know really what that meant. And the problem with that approach, and I reckon all maths teachers have tried other things, they do other more engaging tasks, they do more student-centered things here and there, they do some investigations, but they come back to this traditional way of teaching because they've got to get through the syllabus, and it's the only way they know how to get through the syllabus. So I don't blame them for doing it, because unless someone shows them a way that's time efficient, that allows students to understand, then don't change. But I would like them to do our PD, because that's exactly what we do, right? And let's present maths to students in ways that are time efficient and that have students understand what's going on. And from that understanding comes the engagement and the agency and so on. That's one diagnosis. And I use that procedures first, understanding second as a way, rather than just calling it a procedural approach, because those terms, procedural approach, conceptual approach, carry too much baggage and people have perceptions on it. So I kind of like using this procedures first, understanding second is what doesn't work very well, but it's certainly what I used to do, and it didn't work very well then either. And that's a way of describing, I think, the default current paradigm. And we'll talk about what the change will be in a sec. But another thing, I mentioned the replication practice, right? So I'm a student and the teacher's showing me another thing to do. So I wrote it down and I work through 5 or 6 questions of the similar type. I'm able to do that and also be thinking about what I'm going to do after I get out of this room or whatever, because doing just copying the stuff down is not taking a lot of load from my brain. So it's step-by-step thing. I'm not thinking about, like the teacher may have explained this as part of the whole picture of the topic that we're doing, and it might have been a fantastic explanation. But if what I'm asked to do is just this one little step-by-step thing, for example, I don't know, let's say we're doing fractions and I'm converting from fractions to decimals, right? So I've got to do 10 of these things. Well, it's the same thing over and over. I'm not thinking about place value and these concepts, because the task is to just replicate whatever the teacher has told me. So I don't have a sense of control over that. I'm just blindly following along. It's not interesting. And it's not focusing on understanding. I can do all that. A lot of students can do all that successfully and not understand the work at the end. And they might do okay in the test, but 3 months down the track, they've got no idea.
Yeah.
It's crazy, and one of the problems is we've got the standardized testing. So it's this pressure to get kids to do well on the test. But I say the number one aim should be to have students understand what's going on, have a love for learning, hopefully have a love for mathematics as well, enjoy collaborating, all those things. Because if you are doing maths and you understand it, you don't even necessarily have to know the formula. You can work it out because you actually understand what's going on. I mean, it's great if you can just drag down a formula and because that's fluency and that's important because you want to be fast at it. But I say that's more important than the results in 2 weeks' time, because what does that mean? So anyway, I'm not a great fan of standardized testing and the way a lot of the way education's heading. So I'm very much about let students have a good time in maths by understanding what they're doing. So that's the diagnosis part.
Then how do you teach that understanding?
Right. So
students, you spend more time or?
Okay. Yeah. So what I've mentioned there is the procedures first, understanding second approach, which is, as I've said, I think the default way mathematics tends to be taught in most classes. And the problem with it, I'm not criticizing the teachers, because some teachers can do this and get good results. The problem is that most kids, more than 50%, don't cope well with it in terms of it doesn't promote understanding. And we want to promote understanding, because trying to remember formulas and routines, procedures in mathematics when you don't understand what's going on is the most ridiculous request that any students ever asked. And most students are being asked to do that every day. And it's an impossible thing to succeed at. You have to be able to understand it. So if procedures first, understand, in other words, I'm the teacher, I teach procedures, that's my focus. And I hope that understanding happens. And understanding is a second priority, because I don't even really know how that works. Let's flip that around. Let's become an understanding first, procedures second teacher. Now, I've had some responses from people, oh no, but there's research that says you can't do procedures second, they have to happen at the same time, and blah blah blah. People get their minds in a knot over these pedantics. Sometimes you do it together, sometimes you won't. It's not necessarily a chronological thing. I'm saying it's a priority. So I'm now the teacher, and my number one priority is understanding. So I'm going with a lesson plan, and I want the students to understand the concepts that are underpinning these next procedures. Maybe I'll do that at the same time, as long as I get the students not to replicate my examples, but that they get a reasonable amount of practice at exploring the concept. I've got an activity where they're going to explore the concept. I'll give you an easy example in a minute. So that's my first priority. My second priority is the procedure, not necessarily a lesser priority, but it's the understanding's got to be at least an equal priority, and often will come first. So if now I'm an understanding first, procedure second teacher, right? So that's my number one priority, is this understanding. Sometimes I'm going to say to the class, hey students, we're just going to go into this thing in surds. I'm not going to do the understanding. We're going to go straight into the procedure. I'm going to teach the procedure. I'm going to teach 3 procedures actually. Then we're going to unpack the understanding, right? That's a conscious choice to do it that way because of whatever reason. That's different to when I was a procedures first teacher. I did that all the time without even thinking, right? So now that I'm an understanding first, I've got the choice. I focus on understanding. Procedures are very important, and I can choose what order they come in, depending on what's going to work best for my students. So let's have a look at dividing fractions, right? A half divided by a quarter.
Yep.
Okay. Procedures first, understanding second approach. Right, students, we're going to now look at dividing fractions. When you divide fractions, here's what you do. And here's our example, a half divided by a quarter. You take the second fraction, you invert it, and you change the division sign to a multiplication sign. So your second line is a half multiplied by 4/1, and you do your numerator and denominator and cancel down, and we've got 2. Why? Why do we invert and multiply? How does it 2? It doesn't make any sense. How the heck can a half divided by a quarter equal 2? Do 10 questions, you'll get it, right? There's no way that 80% of students will get any sense of understanding what the heck is going on. So how do you deal with that? And it's difficult to explain why you invert and multiply, right? So you don't bother explaining. You have a look at patterns. And so you're looking at, let's take divide something by 4, now divide it by 2, now divide it by 1, now divide it by half, divide it by, you see the pattern, and they can see what the predicted answers are, right? So that's one way. That's not the whole thing, but that gives them an idea. Let's now play around with some diagrams and see how this works. What does divide mean? Oh, it means how many, like what does 4 divided by 2 mean? Or how many 2's in 4? Right, so what's the answer? That's 2, okay. So what do you think a half divided by a quarter would mean? Oh, it's how many quarters are in a half. Right, let's draw a half. How many quarters? Before you get the question, it's 2. Because now they understand it. So then your first exercise, right? And this is against what the apparent research. Problem with research is you can pretty much go to the net and find anything to back up your answer. To me, this is common sense, right? What I'm explaining right now.
Yeah.
I'm not saying we shouldn't do research. I'm just saying let's not be pedantic about one's got to come before the other. So I think it makes sense to work with the concepts first in this case. So my first activity, I'm going to have a whole lot of shapes on a page that they don't have to spend hours drawing, so they're ready to go, and maybe with questions. And so they're doing questions like, 1 divided by a half, a half divided by a quarter, blah, blah, blah. Ones that are easy to just add extra lines to the diagram and work out what the answer is, right? That might take 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Who knows? Maybe you get the ones the kids who've finished, make up your own. Make one up for your partner, not too hard though. Make it, Then the next worksheet series, same thing, but now they've got to do that and the procedure. But to get the procedure, I'm not going to teach it and say, right, now we know, we now understand this. We know what answers we should be getting. How the heck can we get, what do we have? A half divided by a quarter. How can we possibly get 2 out of that? See if the kids, and so you can do anything you like. Let's just play around with it and see if we can get the invert and multiply. Maybe we will, maybe we won't. Maybe some students already seen it and we'll volunteer it. But that's a more collaborative way of getting to the procedure. Now we've got a procedure. Now you're going to do both. So you're going to do it side by side. You're going to do the diagrammatic answer and the procedure answer. And then you just go into the procedural. But then you can tackle the, what's a 20th divided by a half or half divided by 20th and ones that are more complicated that are too messy on a diagram. So that's an example of an understanding first, procedure second approach in action. That invert and multiply thing, that's actually a trick. Now, in a couple of my PDs, I have a section on trick teaching. Everyone knows Dan Meyer, the famous Dan Meyer TED Talk. He's endorsed a little booklet you can get on the web called Nix The Trix that comes from America. There's all these tricks that teachers teach, not realizing that it's a trick. So invert and multiply is a trick. Teachers think they're teaching shortcuts. A shortcut is a shortcut that makes sense. A trick is a shortcut that doesn't make sense. You know the cross multiplication? Do you know what that means?
Yeah.
So, x on 2 equals y on 3. So you can go 2x equals, you can cross multiply.
Yeah.
That's a trick if it's taught as cross multiplication.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't make sense. What you're doing is you're multiplying both fractions by one denominator and then multiplying both by the other denominator. So it's a 2-step process. As long as kids understand what is really going on, then they can do cross multiplication. I taught cross multiplication for years, not realizing that it wasn't really mathematical. So yeah. It just means that at times you stop kids and say, so why are you allowed to do that? You're doing cross multiplication. Why are you allowed to do that? Because so you're multiplying both sides by the denominators and just doing it in one hit. Excellent. Right? That kid knows what he's doing. But if they're just doing it because I've taught them a trick, whoa, it's bad. There's this speed, distance, time triangle. Have you ever come across that?
Yes.
I could never use it as a teacher because I was so against, I couldn't even wrap my brain around. And the idea is that, so it's distance to the top and then speed on one side and time on the other. And you color in whichever one you're trying to go for. So if it's speed, then it's distance divided by time. And if it's distance multiplying. But that's ridiculous.
I learned that actually in school. Yeah. But it doesn't make sense.
Well, speed is like how far we're traveling over what time. Like that should be an understanding. So obviously we're dividing time into distance, right? If you can go that route, I mean, once they understand this, if they want to use the triangle to help them because it's faster, that's right. But they need to understand, and distance. Okay, so we are walking at a constant pace, and we're doing it for at 10 meters per second, and we're doing it for 5 seconds. How far have we gone? Well, every kid's going to be able to say 50 meters. Did I get that right? I think it did. 50 meters, right? Well, there's the formula.
Yeah.
So a good thing to do is when kids are stuck on something, okay, let's do the same question, but with easy numbers, right? You're moving at 5 meters per second. You walk for 10 seconds. What do? You times the 5 and 10. So do that with your, right. So that's a little helper for students when they're getting stuck. Anyway, my point there is let's avoid procedures first in the hope that understanding happens. Let's do understanding first with procedures as an equal but second priority. Maybe at the same time, maybe at different times. I don't care. But let's have understanding as a primary focus. And let's avoid teaching tricks because a trick is a shortcut that doesn't make mathematical sense. And some tricks can't make mathematical sense. The other problem with procedures first, it's basically replication work for the students. And there is research on this, that if there's not enough cognitive load on a kid, that learning just doesn't happen. And I know why it doesn't happen. It's because it's so freaking boring, right?
Yeah.
So you need to raise the cognitive load, but not too much. But the other thing is there's no sense of control. Oh, okay, I'm being told by the teacher what to do for the 50,000th time, and this is what I'm doing, and now I've got to stop and listen to the next thing, and then I've got to copy this down. I don't have any control over this. And not having control over an activity is boring. It doesn't matter what age you are and what you're doing. But if an activity can be set up like that one I just described with the division of fractions, where students are actually doing stuff on a page, like in diagrams, there's no formula they're following there. They're using their own thinking, and that is intrinsically more enjoyable. So if we can do more of that before you get into the just cranking out answers with a procedure, then they get a sense of control. And that's actually where the engagement comes from. And I honestly think a lot of teachers haven't thought this through and haven't realized that that's a thing. And the reason I say a lot of teachers, because I have teachers do my PD, which walks them through a roadmap and gives them explains, the background as to why we're doing this, and just the common sense, background as to why we're changing from this to that. And I say, look, there's no magic bullets, you've got to persevere, blah, blah, blah. And implementations are a key, right? This is one of my bugbears with professional development. Most PD doesn't work because there's no implementations. It's just theory. So that's why I do self-paced online, facilitated online courses, because then you've got a long period of time and you can require teachers to implement as they go and report back. And then everyone benefits from everyone else's implementations. And then you have people say this, right? They go, oh, Richard, I just tried that activity last lesson Friday. I've never seen that class so engaged. Right? Well, that's not that surprising. The reason they're engaged is because the activity gave the students a sense of control.
Yeah. So I guess this is kind of related to what we were talking about, or we're going to talk about, like fostering agency, right? To give students that sense of control. And that's where the real engagement comes in.
There's two things there. I said I grew up on a fruit orchard. I had it's a basic upbringing. It's very practical, and I like to keep things really simple. I'm saying a student who's got agency, likes learning, knows how to learn, is taking some responsibility for that. They're engaged and they are in action. The opposite to that are those students who they put their hand up, you go and help them, and they look to be listening and they're doing stuff while you're there, and you walk away and they stop. That's the opposite of agency. And those kids are like that because they have no confidence, they don't understand what they're doing, etc., etc. So agency to me is I understand, I'm engaged, and I'm taking responsibility for my learning. And ironically, that's what every maths teacher wants. But I don't know why there's not a bigger focus on let's strive for having agency in my classes, because I think you wanted to get to this before we mentioned it. Sometimes these extraordinary lessons happen as a maths teacher, where you walk in and you have a plan and you're going down that track, and then something happens, like it's really vibing, and something happens and you go down this tangent that you hadn't planned to go down, and everyone's on board, and you walk out and it's fantastic, and you walk out thinking, wow, that's one of the best lessons I've ever taught, and half of that wasn't even planned. The only way that happens is when all the students are on side and contributing. So I'm not having to, Michael, come on, I need your attention. I'm not having to do that. They're with me. They've all got agency. They're inputting into the lesson. And so the whole vibe changes. That's what every maths teacher wants. So why aren't we making agency our number one focus? Because if we've got agency, we've got understanding. If we've got understanding, we've got good long-term exam results, hopefully.
Yeah.
And then teachers are more passionate, because it's demoralizing having to do crowd control and kids along all the time.
So I guess thinking just in the shoes of a teacher, so how do I get ideas on how to present maths in a way that fosters this kind of agency?
Are you asking that so I can promote my
No.
No,
Not
because that's the problem, right? So
yeah,
what we're talking about here is ideas, and hopefully it makes sense to a listener or to someone reading your article.
yeah.
But what does this look
Like,
like in the classroom?
for
And what,
yeah,
right?
like
So that's why I put together these long-term professional developments that run for 12 months or so. Only requires half an hour a week, right? So, and overseas they call this continuous PD. And it's the way to go. You don't want to have to spend 8 hours or 6 hours in a PD in one hit. So to jump in and out of an online program where you can just get it, first of all, do a lot of self-reflection, and then a framework, and then, you know, the sort of stuff that we're talking about, and then some practical examples that you then implement and trial and report back. And then if this is done as a department, then you've got the department head also involved heavily because they're in the program as well. And so the department sharing amongst themselves and collaboration amongst themselves. So it's a very powerful, that's the easiest way to do it. If you're on your own, well, then you just, I think, ask the question, like when you're doing anything, are my students being active learners at the moment or passive? Oh, they're passive, right. What can I do to change this around? Can I create an activity where there is no procedure to follow? In other words, can I create something that allows students to explore the concept or work together, maybe exploring a concept before there's a procedure? So I've got so many things I could explain at once. I've got a little course called the workshopping of concept-specific open-ended questions, right? So an open-ended question is one where the students, here's the answer, come up with the question. So we're doing perimeter of polygons, okay? Make up 5 different polygons that have a perimeter of 24. Well, students, by doing that, if they don't understand what a perimeter is, they can't do it. All right. The typical thing is students will do in a procedural way, they'll learn how to find perimeters of these different diagrams in the book and then areas. And when it comes to the test, they get them confused. Why? Because they don't know what they're doing in either sense. Whereas if you get them to, okay, create figures that have got a perimeter of 24, create figures that have got an area of 16 units. Now, and then you've got the students who are more capable, right? You can't use integer lengths. What? So you put a constraint on them, or yours has got to have a half circle in it as well. So it's a composite figure or whatever. But you workshop this process. I created it's about a 3 or 4 hour course because I'd had this as a little section of another PD for years, and a lot of teachers didn't quite get it. So that's one thing. Yep. So that's the reason I mentioned that was that's an example of an activity where the students are working and there is no procedure to follow. That's what makes it so good. And if they don't understand the concept, they can't do it. That's the whole point. The only way you can get these answers to open-ended questions is if you understand the concept. That's why they're so good. So something like that really helps. I've got another PD which looks at teaching coordinate geometry, straight line graphing, but in a conceptual way. And it's a really good example of how this understanding first approach works, and then you can apply those principles to other units. But one example is in the procedures first way, this used to be me, and I would lose the students after 3 lessons. It always frustrated me because this was one of my favorite topics, and unless I had the top class, these kids were dead after a couple of lessons because I'm teaching the gradient formula, say, right? Here, they have got no idea what they're doing, but they're pumping out gradients. Now I'm going to teach them the distance formula, distance between 2 points. Now I'm going to teach them the midpoint formula. Well, in this other approach, the understanding first approach, you've got students doing all those 3 things, but on grids. You give them grids set up, and they've got so they're using Pythagoras to find the distance, right? They're using their common sense to find the gradient. They're just doing the triangle. Oh yeah, because we've explored that. They're using their logic to find the midpoint. Then when you present the formulas, they go, this is what we've been doing for the last 2 lessons, sir. That's right. And it sticks. And they know they're doing it. I'm talking about the students that normally crash and burn in this sort of topic, they know it's difficult maths because it's not just crunching, integers or, there's something difficult about this, and yet they're succeeding. And the difference between teaching in the procedures first way to an understanding first way in that particular topic was just chalk and cheese. And it's simply because it's not the practitioner, it's the fact that the unit of work, the way it's presented, allows students to understand what they're doing, and it gives them a sense of control, because when they're doing those first activities, there's a lot of ways they can do that. They're not just copying what Mr. Andrews said from the board and getting another answer, right? So there's a lot of examples, but I do think once you get the principle of this and asking, well, okay, my kids are disengaged. Oh yeah, this is passive. So how could I change it up, right? So that's the start of it. And I think a lot of teachers will, once they get the hang of it, once I've done it with a couple of units, it will transfer across. But doing one of these long-term PDs is a great way to go, because especially if it's a whole department, because everyone's in there working at it and seeing come to fruit in their own classrooms.
Yeah, I think that's quite great. So it sounds like the teacher is just kind of there guiding them to understanding the concept.
Well, there's a lot said about, teachers need to be facilitators.
Yes.
Let's say I'm a procedures first teacher. I've been doing it for 10 years. I've got better at that, but I haven't moved out from that model. And now I hear you're telling me about facilitation. I don't have a concept of what that looks like. Like because the way I'm teaching it doesn't open itself up to facilitation much, right? So when you flip it over to understanding first, you naturally, here's something we haven't mentioned yet. It's naturally more student-centric, right? Now, student-centric teaching or learning gets a bad rap. If I say we're going to do student-centered learning to 10 teachers, you get 10 different ideas. People will say, so it's time inefficient. So it takes a lot of time. It's unstructured. So I can't give my explicit instructions anymore because it's student-centered. And the list goes on. None of these things relate to what I'm talking about when I'm talking about student-centered learning. I'm talking about a time-efficient, highly structured approach that simply gives students a greater sense of control. That's what the student-centeredness is. Once you start doing that, then you become a facilitator, and you see 3 times as much insight from students than you'll ever see in a procedures first approach. Because you're listening to what the students are saying. I have been gobsmacked when I first started doing this. This student I had pigeonholed as not very bright and not very good at maths. The ideas this kid was coming out of, and not just this one kid, it was embarrassing for me. I'm thinking, so I've never given this kid a chance until now to show me what he can do and how he can think. That's not my fault. It's just that the methods I was using prior to that didn't allow me to get insight into what these students knew, because it's just me, here's the thing, copy it down, right? Now, the student-centered thing, the reason that understanding first tends to be more student-centered is because it puts the students in the center, because once you have kids exploring and understanding, they're no longer following you, which is a teacher-centered thing. They are doing their own thing, but you've structured it. You've got some worksheet that allows them to do that. And I argue that this methodology usually will save you time. I've got different examples of units where in this particular trigonometry unit, I swear you save between 3 and 4 lessons doing this unit, which means you can spend 3 or 4 lessons doing more extension work, or you can cut it shorter. Same with that conceptual coordinate geometry approach, the same with a whole lot of topics, because the students are no longer just trying to remember just from this boring, replication of procedures into, hey, I understand what we're doing here, and it's more efficient. Or worst case scenario, it doesn't take any longer if you do it right. But when I was making the transition and starting to, I've got this fantastic lesson planned, and I go in there and the kids had a good time, but no one learned anything.
Mm.
It's a dud. And it's like, oh. But now I would see why, because the structure wasn't right. And so you do have to take a couple of hits, you know, and learn how to do it efficiently. But that's, again, why a PD where you've got other teachers doing the same thing is a good idea, because you get to see how to do it efficiently early on.
Yeah, well, it learns like to collaborate with other teachers as
Yeah.
well, learn from each other.
Yeah.
No, that's great. I love that you gave the examples, and I actually heard of student-centric learning before.
Sorry, I think I forgot where I was going there.
No, that's fine. I think you're trying to say that there needs to be structure within a student-centric kind of learning as well.
Yeah,
And the teacher needs to set that structure.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Like set the parameters. It's like you need like I guess it's like creativity. You need some boundaries for creativity as well.
Well, it's interesting. If you read anything about creativity,
Yes.
I'll say restrictions. Some writers will put a restriction on themselves, and then they get more, or like songwriters, they'll put a restriction on, and that'll bring out some extra creativity. My point was going to be, if you just say student-centered approach to a maths teacher or to 10 maths teachers, you'll get, again, 10 different ideas of what you're talking about. Oh, you're talking Montessori, you know, blah, blah, blah. It's this, it's that. And all the misconceptions they have, you can do the opposite to those misconceptions in a student-centered. Like it can involve explicit instruction. It can give you more control, not less. It can be time efficient. It's engaging, you know, the whole thing.
Yeah.
But it's got to be done right.
Yeah, got it. Yeah, I think that's a lot on what we've kind of want to cover, I guess.
Yeah. Did you want to do a quick thing on authentic engagement? I can do this quick, and normal engagement, or not?
Yes. Yeah, that's yeah, I'm fine to do that.
I used to run workshops like this, and if you go to a workshop on engaging your math students, you're bound to get a whole lot of really cool little activities, relays and games and competitions and, you know, prizes and all this sort of stuff. And these are like the toolkit activities, right? So I'm a little bit tongue-in-cheek here, but if I'm a procedures first teacher, I'm aware that I'm not very good at engaging my students. So every now and then I'll do something that's fun and that will engage my kids. And so I'll pull out one of my toolkit engagement activities, and maybe it's a game, a relay, and that's their little 20 minutes of fun in a 2-week block. So that's how I tick off the engagement box in my head. But then we revert to normal maths teaching, which is basically do whatever I say, which is boring, right? But I do some engaging activities. Mind you, when I was at school in 12 years, I never remember any of those sorts of engagement activities. So there's nothing wrong with those. To quote Seinfeld, not that there's anything wrong with it. It's better to do some engagement activities than not. But that's what I would call external engagement. And it's dependent on the teacher ramping it up and doing their thing and having this fun activity, which is great. But what happened, what I'm interested in is what's the normal state of play. So if the normal state of engagement of students is not very engaged, but once a fortnight we do something that's fun, that's getting there, but it's missing the point. So authentic engagement is something that comes from within. And it's as simple as this. If students understand what they're doing and have a sense of control over what they're doing, they're going to be engaged. And that really is more of a setup thing than I'm the teacher, I'm going to ramp this up, we're going to do this relay, it's going to be crazy and blah, 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 which is a lot of fun to do. But you know what I mean? The intrinsic engagement is much more about the overall approach that I'm using. And look, humans love duality. Oh, so you're talking understanding, so you don't believe in procedures then. It's one or the other, you know. It's you're either teaching procedurally or you're teaching for understanding. Or you're either teacher-centered or you're student-centered. You know, you're either engaging or you're not. And so in terms of this replication thing, you know, when I say that's a trap, I'm not saying we're never going to have students replicate. I'm just saying if you're teaching, and this is a good question for teachers to ask themselves, how much in how much of your lesson time for any particular class are your students replicating what you've explained? Now, if it's 80%, you're probably better than most. But if it's 80%, could we get it down to 70% and replace that with 10% of activities where students are exploring the concepts in a time-efficient way that makes sense? So it's not one or the other. I'm not saying you chuck everything out that you think you know and do something different. It's just if we're shooting ourselves in the foot, if we're using activities that don't allow kids to understand as well as they could and don't foster agency, let's do something different so we can present maths in ways that do foster agency. So the intrinsic engagement simply comes from students understanding and having a sense of control over the activity. That's it. There's no bells and whistles. And you can still do some of your other crazy relay stuff because you'll have more time, because this way, I believe, and my experience is more time efficient. So that's the difference between typical normal engagement, which is very teacher driven and competition based and whatever, which is great.
Yeah.
But intrinsic engagement comes from within. And most students, like your compliance students, you can have a class that a lot of teachers think, oh, this is a great class, they do all the work, they get good results. Hang on. If they're just doing the work because they'd rather do the work than get into trouble, and they're not really into it, they'd rather be elsewhere, and they're not contributing to lessons, and they're just, chewing up whatever you say, and they do the practice, that's not what we're looking for. How does that help in the long term? So we want students who are intrinsically engaged, who understand, who are contributing, who are communicating their understanding to each other. Because then they understand how to learn, they enjoy learning, it flows on to other things.
Yeah.
And they get a love of maths. Everyone wins. I don't know. Not everyone will agree with what I'm saying. I don't care. This is just common sense. Show me some logical arguments against what I'm saying, and I'll listen to it. But I don't. I think I make sense
from experience as well. But thank you. I guess one of the things probably school leaders might face is how can they encourage teachers or educators to grow professionally?
Yeah.
Because is there a lot of resistance there or barriers?
What are the most common roadblocks that school leaders face? Well, the first roadblock is that most teachers, consciously or unconsciously, don't really want to take advice from other leaders in terms of how to teach. It's just, this is my domain, particularly if I'm experienced. And it's not necessarily a conscious thing. It's a bit of a human thing. I've never been like that myself, and I don't know why. I'm not praising myself up. I always question what I do, but not everyone does, right? It's a bit of an ego thing. So no, I know what I'm doing. So I wrote that, I don't know if you saw that Prairie article.
Yes, I did.
Right.
I love that one.
I thought that was a good analogy. So where the typical teacher is a horse in a paddock, and on the other side of the fence is the prairie. So they'll nibble on the ideas. They'll nibble, but I think a lot of teachers are thinking unconsciously, I'll try this activity, but I'm not going to change my default practice, right? Which is probably procedures first, but I don't know it's procedures first because I don't even think about it. It's just how maths is taught. So yes, I'll dabble with these other ideas. So the idea of that article was, let's get our teachers in the prairie for a few weeks or a couple of months. And the prairie is where, let's embrace this understanding first approach. Let's implement a whole heap. Let's go for it fully for a decent length of time, and then decide whether we want to be back in the paddock or not. Because my experience is, once you really experience the joy of teaching this way and the response you get from kids, you can't go back. I couldn't teach in a procedures first way if someone waved a ridiculous amount of money in front of me. I just couldn't do it. So because it's addictive. Oh, maybe depends on how much money, I suppose. That was a silly thing to say, but you know what I mean. The idea of let's go and explore the prairie. So that's a block, right? Now, to shine a light on that, to ask the question, hey, what's the chance that some of us here are thinking, well, I'm happy to dabble, but I'm not going to change my default practice. That's very difficult for a school leader to say, But if a school leader was to jump on the board a PD program where someone else was saying that, and the school leader was part of the gang doing the PD with them and was able to encourage and ask questions and how you're going with this and have you implemented that, that would work. And it does work. So that's, I've just done another plug. That's the department-wide PD that I run, right? So that is a block. Teachers resistant to change. And just throwing some little activities at teachers and getting them to try it isn't going to change the default, because this is where I'm coming from. What's our default practice in the classroom? Is it creating passive learners? Despite the fact that the teacher's been experienced and has got accolades, are the students active or passive? If they're not active, then let's change the default. Let's tweak it. I'm not saying chuck it out and start again with something else. Let's just change a few things and see what happens. If the leader's going to do it on their own, that takes a lot of energy to keep that up and to make sure that the implementations are happening and reporting back and whatever. They don't have a lot of time for that. So there's two things there. One, a resistance to taking direction on pedagogy. And the second is, oh yeah, I'll try that, Michelle. But what I don't realize I'm saying in the back of my head is I'm not going to change my default. I'm happy to put that in my toolkit and do it once a month. But I'm still going to teach the way I teach, even though it creates passive learners, but I don't realize it creates passive learners because I've never really thought about it. This is all about awareness change. There's no point saying to a procedures first teacher, there's no point saying to me back when I was my first couple of years teaching, here's a student-centered approach, Richard, go and do it. Because I'm not going to know what to do, because I'm not operating at the level of awareness that approach requires. Because facilitating that sort of thing does require a bigger level of awareness, and you need to understand why you're doing it and those dynamics. That's why a PD like this is a good idea. So it's an awareness change. So that the leader needs to realize that there's no point just throwing better teaching techniques at teachers if they haven't made the awareness shift. So that's a tricky thing to do, especially for a leader. The other thing I'll close on is for the leader, you've got to see yourself you've got to see that your teachers as equals, but playing a different role. I'm not better than you. I'm not higher than you. I'm an equal to you. I'm playing a different role. My role is called head of department. Your role is called teacher. It's a different role, but we're equals here. So let's hear you out. Let's be open and honest. And also, this is really important to set up an environment where it's transparent, where it's okay for someone to come into the staff room after a lesson and go, oh my God, those year nines were a nightmare. That was tough, and to be able to let off some steam, whereas a lot of times people feel they can't be honest about the struggles they've got because then they're going to get found out. I did some casual teaching in a school that was particularly, I had been in a number of classes of different teachers and it was not pretty. And then I'm in the staff room and it's like, are there no problems in this school? Like everyone's sitting there thinking, nothing wrong with my world. It's all fine and dandy, And I found it really worrying. And that time I didn't intend to be a head of maths, but I thought if I ever become a head of maths, my department's going to be very transparent. And if anyone's having a bad day, they can just let off steam, because this is silly to have this pretense that everything's fine. No, that's a bit of advice. Like let's be transparent, have a bit of fun. Mathematics teachers need to lighten up. Seriously, a lot of us are way too serious. No, it's just tragic. Seriously. When was the last time you saw a teenager motivated by seriousness?
I don't know. I think it's all the stress of teaching as well.
Well, I know. But anyway.
Thank you so much, Richard. Obviously, there's a lot to look through, and we'll just keep in touch on LinkedIn and email then.
Will do. Thanks, Michelle.
Yeah.
See ya.
Thanks, Richard. Bye. See ya.